My name is Walter Hensley. I'm 70 years old, and I live on a small farm in Goochland County, just west of Richmond, Virginia. For most of my life, I believed that the worst betrayals happen between strangers. I was wrong. The deepest wounds are carved by the hands we once held, and this is the story of how my own daughter tried to erase me from my own life, and how she learned, far too late, exactly who her father really was. When I walked into that courtroom on a rain-soaked Monday morning, my daughter smirked. My son-in-law shook his head with open contempt. I was wearing my plain country clothes, a flannel shirt washed thin at the elbows, worn-out leather boots caked with the honest dust of my fields, and an old felt hat that I held in both hands the way a man holds something he is afraid to lose. I looked, I suppose, like a lost farmer, a confused old man who had wandered into a place of marble and mahogany where he did not belong. I saw Charlotte lean toward Grant and whisper something behind her manicured hand. He smiled, that slow, self-satisfied smile that had always come to him as naturally as breathing. Then I heard it, her laugh, a small, choked, involuntary laugh of pure contempt, and the sound of it cut through my chest like a blade drawn slowly across old scar tissue. To them, I was an embarrassment, an inconvenience, a senile old fool in a farmer's hat who had no business standing in a courtroom, no business fighting for his own mind, no business existing at all beyond the signature they needed from my trembling hand. But then the judge looked up. His eyes met mine across the crowded chamber, and I watched something extraordinary happen. The color drained from his face the way water drains from a cracked basin, suddenly, completely. His hand trembled against the wooden gavel. His lips parted, and he whispered something that fell into the room like a stone into still water, silencing every cough, every shuffled paper, every smug murmur from the plaintiff's table. "My God," he said, "is it really him?" Every head in that courtroom turned toward me. The silence grew so thick I could hear my own heartbeat drumming in my ears. Charlotte stopped smiling. Grant frowned, glancing from the judge to me and back again, as if the man on the bench had lost his mind. They had no idea who I truly was. Not until that moment. Before I take you back to where it all began, let me say this. If you find yourself connecting with my story, please hit the like button. It brings a little sunshine into this old father's heart. Subscribe to my channel so you don't miss the life stories I still have left to tell. And write in the comments where in the world you're watching from, and what time it is there right now. It genuinely warms me to know which corner of the country or the planet is sitting with me tonight, sharing this cup of coffee and this long, hard road. Now, let me tell you how my own child came to laugh at me in a court of law, and why that laugh was the most expensive mistake of her life. It all started 3 months ago, on what was supposed to be an ordinary Thursday afternoon at my farm in Goochland County. Since my beautiful wife Margaret passed away 2 years ago, Maggie, to everyone who loved her, which was everyone who ever met her, that farm had been my entire world. 42 acres of rolling Virginia pasture, a white farmhouse with a wraparound porch, a vegetable garden that Maggie had planted with her own 2 hands, and a small flock of chickens who had somehow become my most reliable conversation partners. It was a quiet sanctuary, far from the noise of the city, a place where I could tend the tomatoes, mend the fences, and sit on the porch in the evenings remembering the 4 good decades Maggie and I had built together. People in town knew me as the quiet widower with the old blue pickup. They knew I paid cash at the feed store, that I tipped the boy who delivered my propane, that I went to church on Christmas and Easter and sat in the back. What they did not know, what almost nobody knew, was what I had done for 30 years before I ever bought that farm. I had let that part of my life fall silent, the way you let a heavy coat hang in the back of a closet when the weather turns warm. I was retired. I wanted peace. I thought I had earned it, and I thought, God forgive me for how completely I thought it, that I had a family I could trust. My only child, Charlotte, was 41 years old, sharp as a new blade, beautiful in the polished, deliberate way of a woman who has decided exactly how the world will see her. 10 years ago, she married Grant Ward, a fast-talking venture capitalist with a firm in downtown Richmond, a man who wore tailored suits to Sunday dinners and spoke about money the way preachers speak about salvation. When Maggie got sick, Charlotte and Grant were there, or they appeared to be there, which at the time I could not tell apart. They sat in hospital waiting rooms. They brought casseroles nobody ate, and when Maggie was gone and the paperwork of grief began to pile up on my kitchen table, The accounts, the taxes, the insurance, the endless forms that death generates. Grant put his hand on my shoulder and said the words I would come to replay 10,000 times. Walter, you've carried enough. Let me handle the finances. You just rest. I was drowning in loss, and he offered me a raft. So I took it. I gave him access. I signed the authorizations. I handed my life's ledger to my son-in-law because he was family, because Charlotte was my blood, because Maggie would have wanted us close, and because a grieving man wants nothing more in this world than to believe that the people who share his table also share his heart. For 2 years it seemed to work. The bills got paid. The statements arrived and I barely glanced at them. Charlotte called every Sunday. They came out to the farm for holidays, and if Grant checked his phone through most of dinner, and if Charlotte's questions about my health had started to sound less like concern and more like inventory, well, I told myself that was just the modern world. That was just how busy, successful people loved you now. That Thursday afternoon, I walked down the long dirt driveway to check the mailbox, the way I did every day around 4 o'clock. The autumn air smelled of dry leaves and distant wood smoke. Among the grocery flyers and the seed catalogs, there was a thick envelope with a bright red stamp across the front. Urgent. It was from the county tax office. I tore it open right there in the driveway, expecting a routine receipt. Instead, the bold black letters at the top of the page made the breath catch in my throat like a fishhook. Final Notice of Death, Property Tax Delinquent. Imminent foreclosure warning. I stood there while the wind turned to ice against my skin, and I read that document 3 times. It stated that my property taxes were 90 days past due, and that if the balance was not settled by the end of the month, the county would begin proceedings to seize my farm. My farm. The house where Maggie's garden still bloomed every spring, the porch where we had planned to grow old and had only half succeeded. The land I intended to die on, peacefully, decades from now, with the smell of cut grass in the air. It made no sense. None. Because exactly 1 month earlier, I had transferred $35,000 directly into Grant's account, money set aside specifically to cover those property taxes. He had assured me over a family dinner, with a glass of my own bourbon in his hand, that everything was taken care of. "Don't stress that retired mind of yours with paperwork and wire transfers, Walter," he'd said, and Charlotte had laughed and squeezed his arm, and I had felt, fool that I was, grateful. I pulled out my phone right there in the driveway and dialed Charlotte's number. My hands were shaking, not from age, but from a sudden, sharp spike of adrenaline that I had not felt in a very long time, though my body remembered it instantly, the way a soldier's body remembers the sound of a distant shot. She answered on the 4th ring. I could hear the ambient murmur of an upscale restaurant behind her voice. Glassware, low laughter, a piano somewhere. "Hello, Dad. I'm in the middle of a lunch meeting. Can I call you back?" "Charlotte, I need to know why I just received a foreclosure warning from the county tax office," I said, keeping my voice as level as I could manage. "I gave Grant the money for the taxes 4 weeks ago. What is going on?" There was a pause on the line. A long one. The restaurant noise seemed to muffle, as if she had cupped her hand around the phone and stepped away from the table. "Dad, calm down." Her tone had shifted into something I would come to know intimately over the following weeks. A patronizing sweetness, the vocal equivalent of a hand patting a child's head. "Grant handled that. You probably got a delayed automated letter. You know how slow the county is. Don't worry about it. We'll come over tonight and sort it all out. Just rest, just rest." The second time in 2 years, someone in my family had prescribed rest the way a doctor prescribes sedation. They arrived at the farm just after sunset. The headlights of Grant's sleek black luxury sedan swept across the porch where I sat waiting, the foreclosure notice flat on my knee like an indictment. Grant stepped out first, still in his tailored suit, looking entirely unbothered, checking something on his phone before he even looked at the house. Charlotte followed, clutching a designer handbag, her face already arranged into an expression of exhausted patience, the face of a woman bracing herself to manage a difficult child. I invited them into the living room and placed the notice on the coffee table between us, red ink facing up. "Explain this to me, Grant," I said. He did not even pick up the paper. He sighed, unbuttoned his suit jacket, and settled back into my sofa with an arrogant ease, one arm stretched along the cushions as if the house were already his. "Walter, you're getting worked up over nothing," he said smoothly. "I paid the taxes weeks ago. The county is notoriously slow about updating their records. You know how these government bureaucracies operate. This letter was printed 3 days ago, I said, tapping the date at the top of the page. It says explicitly that no payment has been received. If you paid it, show me the bank confirmation, right now. Grant exchanged a quick, exasperated glance with Charlotte. It was a look I recognized, a look that said, "Here we go again with the old man." "Dad, stop interrogating him." Charlotte stepped forward and laid a perfectly manicured hand on her husband's shoulder. "He is doing you a favor by managing your accounts. And honestly, you've been forgetting everything lately. You're confused." "I am not confused, Charlotte. I am reading a legal document." "You are confused, Dad." Her voice rose just enough to dominate the room, and her eyes locked onto mine, unyielding, cold, rehearsed. "Do you not realize how bad your memory has gotten? Last week you forgot the name of my new dog. 2 days ago you called me asking what day it was. And yesterday," she paused and let out a dramatic trembling breath that belonged on a stage. "Yesterday we stopped by while you were napping, and the gas stove was on. The whole kitchen smelled like a leak, Dad. You could have blown up the entire house. You could have died. We had to shut it off and open all the windows." The room went dead silent. The only sound was the ticking of the old grandfather clock in the hallway. Maggie's clock, the one her father had left her, keeping its steady, indifferent time. I stared at my daughter, and I felt the ground beneath my boots turn to ash. The gas stove. For a fraction of a second, my own mind betrayed me. I imagined the smell of gas. I felt the phantom warmth of that kitchen. Maggie used to stand at that exact stove, humming along to her old jazz records while her Sunday pot roast simmered. The smell of garlic and rosemary filling every room of the house, making these walls feel less like a building and more like an embrace. But when Maggie lost her battle 2 years ago, the music stopped, the cooking stopped. The stove went cold. I turned my head slowly toward the kitchen archway, and the truth rose up in me like floodwater. I had not turned on that gas stove in 2 years. I lived on cold sandwiches, microwave meals, and coffee from an electric percolator. More than that, I had shut off the main gas valve behind the appliance months ago, with my own hands, precisely because I had no use for it. I remembered the squeak of the valve. I remembered wiping the grease from my fingers on a blue shop rag. It was physically impossible for me to have left that stove on yesterday. And that was the moment a terrifying, icy clarity washed over me, colder than any autumn wind. I was not losing my mind. My daughter was lying to my face, deliberately, fluently, with tears queued up and trembling breath rehearsed. Why? Why would she invent a story about me nearly blowing up my own house? Why did Grant look so profoundly calm about $35,000 missing dollars? I looked at their faces again. Really looked, the way I had once looked at faces across an interrogation table. Charlotte was performing the role of the concerned, heartbroken daughter flawlessly. Grant was playing the patient, long-suffering son-in-law. If I had been merely what they believed me to be, a grieving old farmer with a fading mind, I would have broken down right then. I would have apologized for my failing memory. I would have handed them my independence like a coat at the door. But they had forgotten one crucial detail about my past. Before I moved to that farm, before I became the quiet old man who talked to his chickens and mended his own fences, I spent 30 years as a federal prosecutor. 30 years in the United States Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Virginia. 30 years staring into the eyes of the most ruthless, most articulate, most beautifully mannered white-collar criminals this country produces. I had prosecuted bank fraud, wire fraud, embezzlement schemes that unfolded like symphonies. I had sat across from men in $5,000 suits who could lie about anything, their names, their mothers, their whereabouts on the night in question, without a flicker of hesitation. And in those 30 years, I learned something that no law school teaches. I learned exactly what a lie looks like. Not the words. The words are the easy part. Anyone can arrange words. I mean the architecture beneath the words. The micro-expressions of a cornered sociopath. The fractional delay before manufactured outrage. The way a liar's eyes check their accomplice. One quick flick, involuntary as a heartbeat, to confirm the story is landing. I was seeing all of it, every single tell, right there in my own living room, on the faces of my own family. My gut screamed at me to stand up and end the charade, to demand my money, to rip the truth out of them the way I had ripped it out of 100 witnesses on 100 witness stands. But the older, colder machinery of my mind, The prosecutor's machinery, dusty but intact, engaged with a quiet click, and it said something very different. It said, "Not yet. If I confronted them now, with nothing but a tax notice and my own certainty, they would escalate. My anger itself would become their evidence. Look how paranoid he's getting. Look how he rages." Every objection I raised would be entered into the ledger of my supposed decline. You cannot win a case with instinct. You win it with proof, patiently gathered, overwhelmingly presented. To win this war, I had to let them believe there was no war at all. I had to let them believe they had already won. So I did the hardest thing I have ever done as a father. I surrendered, theatrically, completely, falsely. I let my shoulders slump. I let my hands tremble a little more visibly against my knees. I dropped my gaze to the floorboards and arranged my face into the mask of a defeated, confused old man. I left the stove on, I murmured, letting my voice crack with manufactured vulnerability. "Yes, Dad." Charlotte's voice softened instantly into that sugary register, warm as syrup and just as cloying. "It terrified us. You're getting older. The grief is catching up with you. You can't handle all this stress anymore." I nodded slowly, keeping my eyes down so she could not see what was actually burning behind them. "You might be right," I whispered. I'm just so tired." Grant stood buttoning his jacket with a satisfied little smirk he didn't bother to hide. "Don't worry about the tax notice, Walter. I'll call the county Monday morning and clear up their clerical error. You just focus on resting. We'll take care of everything. We'll take care of everything." I have heard death sentences pronounced with less menace. They walked out into the dark, and I stood at the window and watched the taillights of that luxury sedan shrink down my driveway and vanish into the trees. And as the sound of the engine faded, something remarkable happened inside my chest. The grief, the crushing, disorienting sorrow of realizing your only child sees you as prey, did not disappear. But it changed state, it cooled, it hardened, it became something with edges. They thought I was a clueless old man waiting politely to die. They thought they could drain my accounts, rewrite my memories, and gaslight me into a locked ward without resistance. What they had actually done was wake a sleeping lion, who had spent 30 years learning exactly how predators are caught. The hunt had officially begun. The very next morning, Charlotte appeared at the farm before the sun had cleared the tree line. She walked into my kitchen carrying a small, unmarked amber bottle, and she set it on the counter beside my coffee maker with a soft, patronizing smile. The smile a nurse gives a patient who doesn't yet know his diagnosis. "Dad, I spoke with Dr. Feldman this morning," she said, pouring my coffee for me as if my hands could no longer be trusted with a pot. "He agrees with Grant and me. The grief, the isolation, it's taking a toll on your cognitive function. He prescribed these supplements to support your memory, to keep you sharp." I stared at the little bottle. It looked innocent enough. A plastic cylinder of small white capsules, no label, no pharmacy sticker, no dosage instructions. And a voice in the back of my skull, a very old and very cynical voice that had once cross-examined mob accountants and crooked physicians, whispered a single sentence. "Do not take them." I should have listened. That instinct had never once failed me in 30 years of courtrooms. But standing in that kitchen was not a witness or a defendant. It was my daughter. The little girl I had taught to ride a bicycle on this very driveway, running behind her with my hand on the seat, long after she no longer needed it. The teenager I had driven to college with the car packed so full we couldn't see out the back window. The bride I had walked down the aisle, her arm in mine, both of us crying and pretending we weren't. How could I let my paranoid prosecutor's brain accuse my own flesh and blood of poisoning me, over a tax notice and a lie about a stove? What kind of father does that make me? So I told myself the stress was making me jumpy. I told myself that trust is what family is. I unscrewed the cap, shook a capsule into my palm, and swallowed it with my coffee while my daughter watched. Charlotte beamed. She kissed me on the cheek, told me she'd text every morning to make sure I took my medicine, and drove back to the city with her window down and her sunglasses on. And for the sake of family peace, God help me, I did what I was told. Within 2 weeks, my entire physical reality began to warp. It started as a subtle heaviness behind my eyes, a dark, persistent fog that settled over my brain by mid-morning like weather. I had woken at 5 a.m. every day of my adult life. By the end of the first week, I was struggling to drag myself out of bed before 10. My legs felt like they were filled with wet sand. I would sit on the edge of the mattress gasping like a man surfacing from deep water. Then came the tremors. I noticed them first while signing for a delivery of chicken feed. My hands shook so violently the pen skittered off the clipboard and clattered onto the porch boards. The delivery driver bent to pick it up for me, and the look he gave me was worse than the tremor itself. It was pity, the kind of look you give a dying animal. It made my stomach turn. By the second week, the fog had thickened into a wall. Thoughts would form, sharp and clear, and dissolve into static before they reached my mouth. I caught myself staring at the living room wall for entire hours, unable to remember what I had stood up to do. The mind that had once held entire racketeering indictments in perfect order. Every count, every exhibit, every date was being reduced to wet paper. Worst of all, my memories of Maggie began to blur at the edges, and that frightened me more than dying. But through all of it, one thought kept piercing the fog like a lighthouse through storm. The money. The $35,000. Grant had sworn it was handled. I needed to see my bank records with my own eyes. One quiet afternoon, I sat down at the kitchen table and pulled my laptop toward me. My fingers trembled over the keys. It took 3 attempts just to type the bank's web address. The letters swam on the screen like minnows. I found the login page. I entered my username. Then I clicked the password field and the cursor blinked at me, patient and merciless. My mind went blank. I had used the same password for 5 years. Maggie's maiden name and our anniversary year, a sequence burned into me deeper than my own phone number. I closed my eyes. I rubbed my temples. I reached into the filing cabinet of my mind and the drawer slid open and it was empty. Nothing. White noise where my life used to be. I typed a guess. Incorrect. A variation. Incorrect. My shaking hands hit wrong keys on the 3rd try and a red box flashed across the screen. Your account has been temporarily locked due to multiple failed login attempts. Please contact customer service. I grabbed my phone and dialed the bank, my thumbs fumbling. The automated voice asked for my account number. I read it off my debit card. Then, please enter your 4-digit telephone security PIN to speak with a representative. 4 digits. 4 numbers I knew like my own name. I stood in my kitchen with the phone pressed to my ear like a block of ice, and the numbers simply refused to come. The drugs in my bloodstream had built a dam between me and my own life. I hung up. I set the phone down very carefully on the counter, because I did not trust my hands. And I stood there in the silence of Maggie's kitchen, next to Maggie's cold stove, and I made myself think one clear thought through the fog, dragging it forward word by word like a man hauling rope. Healthy men do not fall apart in 14 days. Grief does not cause tremors on a schedule. Age does not erase a password overnight. But medication does, sedatives do. And this, every symptom, the fog, the shaking, the drowning fatigue, this had all begun exactly one morning after my daughter set an unmarked bottle beside my coffee. I walked to the cabinet, took down the amber bottle, and poured the white capsules into my palm. They looked so small, so harmless. I thought of Charlotte's morning texts. "Did you take your medicine, Dad?" Arriving with the punctuality of a jailer's rounds, and I understood with a clarity that no fog could touch what these pills were and what they were for. From that morning forward, I performed a small daily theater. I texted Charlotte back, "Took it with breakfast, sweetheart." Then I dropped the capsule into an envelope, 1 per day, dated in pencil, sealed and hidden inside a hollowed-out Bible on my study shelf. Evidence, chain of custody, old habits, and day by day as the poison drained out of my blood, my mind came back to me like feeling returning to a numb limb. The fog lifted, the tremors quieted, the passwords, the pins, the dates. Everything came home. They believed they were watching an old man dissolve. What they were actually watching was a prosecutor coming out of retirement. Before I made a single move, I needed to know exactly what had been in those capsules. Certainty is the currency of a courtroom, and I intended to be rich in it. I told Charlotte I was driving into town for chicken feed. Instead, I drove 40 minutes in the opposite direction to a small rural clinic where nobody knew my name, paid in cash, and asked the young physician there to run a full toxicology panel on my blood, quietly and with a certified copy of the results. 2 days later, the clinic called. The doctor's voice was careful, the way doctors get when the news is not medical but criminal. My blood contained a significant concentration of a prescription antipsychotic, a powerful sedative compound, the kind used to chemically restrain patients in psychiatric crisis. There was no legitimate prescription for it anywhere in my medical history. In an otherwise healthy 70-year-old man, he said, the side effects would present as tremors, severe cognitive fog, memory disruption, and profound fatigue. In other words, everything my daughter had been describing to relatives, neighbors, and, I would later learn, doctors, as my decline. She was not documenting my deterioration, she was manufacturing it. While I was in town that day, I also bought a cheap prepaid phone with cash, the kind they sell hanging on pegs beside the motor oil. I slid it into my boot before I drove home. My primary phone, my landline, my email, I had to assume all of it was watched. When people are bold enough to drug your coffee, they are bold enough to read your messages. The next piece of the puzzle arrived on its own, wearing a wool coat. Grant came to the farm alone on a gray Tuesday afternoon, ostensibly to check on me. He let himself in without knocking now. A small thing, but small things are how ownership announces itself. He moved through my house making a show of concern while his eyes did inventory. The paintings, the silver, the locked door of my study. And when he leaned over the armchair where I sat doing my best impression of a fading man, I saw it. A flash of brass in the open pocket of his coat. A key, small, squat, unmistakable. The key to the floor safe in my study. The safe Maggie and I had installed 30 years ago. The safe that held her jewelry, the deed to the farm, my bearer bonds, and the original copies of every document that made my life legally mine. There were exactly 2 keys to that safe in existence. One was on my ring, the other had been in Maggie's dresser drawer. He had been in my bedroom. He had gone through my dead wife's things. The rage that went through me in that moment had a taste like copper. But rage is a luxury, and I could not afford luxuries. What I could afford, what 30 years of federal service had unexpectedly equipped me for, was a piece of tradecraft I had learned from the least respectable teacher of my career. Decades ago, I had built a case against an organized theft ring operating along the eastern seaboard, and my star cooperating witness was a wiry old pickpocket named Sal Moretti. Fingers to the men who feared losing their watches around him. During the long dead hours in the safe house, Sal had taught me, half as a joke, the mechanics of what he called the dip. Successful theft, he explained, is never about speed, it is about misdirection. You create a sudden physical shock, an overwhelming point of contact that floods the target's senses, and in that flooded moment their body cannot feel your hand at all. I never imagined I would use a street thief's trick against my own son-in-law in my own living room. Life is a long and surprising road. I gripped the armrests and began pushing myself up, letting my legs shake violently. "Grant," I gasped, "I need water." He rolled his eyes. "Just sit down, Walter. I'll get it." And as he stepped in to push me back into the chair, I executed the maneuver exactly as Sal had taught it. I let my eyes roll back. I let every ounce of tension drop out of my knees. My full dead weight collapsed forward into Grant's chest. He grunted in shock, his phone thumping onto the carpet as both his arms flew around my torso to keep us from going down together. His hands clamped my shoulders. His entire nervous system was consumed by the sudden burden of 180 falling pounds. And in that flooded, blinded moment, my right hand slipped smoothly into his open coat pocket. My fingers found the cold brass. I pinched the key between index and middle finger, drew it out in one fluid motion, and tucked it into the waistband of my trousers beneath my sweater. The entire extraction took less than 2 seconds. "What is wrong with you?" Grant snapped, wrestling my frame back into the armchair. "Sit down, come on." I slumped against the cushions, blinking wildly, breathing in ragged theatrical gasps. "I'm sorry," I whispered. The room went black. So dizzy. He straightened his expensive coat with a look of pure revulsion, bent to retrieve his phone, and never noticed that his pocket had gotten lighter. "This is exactly why you can't be left alone anymore," he muttered, thumbing a rapid message into his screen. "You're becoming a liability, Walter. I'll get you some tap water, and then I have a meeting." He banged a glass of water onto the side table. "Drink that and stay in the chair. Charlotte will call you tonight." "Thank you, Grant," I murmured, hands folded meekly over the stolen key in my lap. "You're a good son." He sneered and walked out. I listened to his car crunch away down the gravel, and I did not move a muscle until the engine faded completely into the trees. Then I sat up straight. The tremors vanished, the weakness evaporated like morning mist. I opened my palm and looked at the brass key. Heavy, cold, its teeth biting gently into my skin. It was not just a piece of metal. It was proof. Proof that they were already inside my vault, dismantling my life from the inside out, photographing and cataloging everything Maggie and I had built, preparing to carry it away. The time for hiding was over. Every piece of evidence I gathered from this night forward would be a nail in their coffins. I was not going to merely survive what they were doing to me. I was going to dismantle their fraudulent world as methodically as they had tried to erase mine. I waited until the sun dropped below the tree line and the farm was wrapped in total darkness. Then I pulled the prepaid phone from my boot, powered it on, and dialed a number I had memorized more than 20 years ago and never once written down. The line rang twice before a deep, gravelly voice answered, Raymond Delgado. Raymond was a titan of the civil bar, a litigator who moved through courtrooms with a surgeon's precision and a shark's appetite. In my prosecuting days, we had faced each other across the aisle more times than I could count, and he had beaten me exactly twice, which was 2 more times than anyone else ever managed. Over the decades, that rivalry had quietly annealed into the deepest kind of professional respect. He was brilliant, he was discreet, and he owed loyalty to no one in my family's orbit. He was the only man alive I could trust with a secret of this size. Raymond, I said quietly, it's Walter Hensley. I'm on an unregistered phone. Do not call my primary number. There was a brief pause, and when he spoke again, all the ease had left his voice. Walter, men like you don't buy burner phones to talk about the weather. Tell me. I laid it out with the clinical detachment of a man reading an indictment. The vanished 35,000, the foreclosure notice, the lie about the gas stove, the unmarked bottle, the toxicology report, the dated envelopes of capsules hidden in a hollow Bible, the brass key I had lifted from Grant's coat 2 hours earlier. I offered no emotional commentary. I gave him facts, dates, and documents, and I told him the plain truth at the bottom of it. If this failed, I would lose everything, my land, my estate, and my freedom. Raymond was silent for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a quiet, terrifying anger. They're building a fraudulent conservatorship, Walter. They're manufacturing medical evidence of incompetence, so a court will hand them your entire estate with a judge's blessing. It's elegant. It's evil. And we are going to burn it to the ground. But we need to document everything, now, tonight, before they move. I need eyes inside my own house, I told him. I need to catch Grant opening that safe, but it has to be completely off the books. No commercial security companies, no invoices, no paper trail they can stumble across. I have a private technical team, Raymond said. Former federal surveillance people who work exclusively for my firm, discreet and fast. I'll send them tonight. Leave the back door unlocked. The hours before midnight crawled. I sat in the dark living room watching moonlight move across the floorboards, running legal scenarios the way I once had before the biggest trials of my career. I was no longer a father trying to understand his child. I was an investigator building a trap. At midnight precisely, 2 unmarked sedans rolled up my dirt driveway with their headlights extinguished. 3 figures in dark, nondescript clothing moved silently to my back porch, gloved, carrying gear bags that looked like ordinary luggage. They asked no questions and offered no pleasantries. They simply went to work with a quiet professionalism that settled my nerves like a hand on the shoulder. By 3 in the morning, my study was invisibly wired. Microscopic high-definition cameras in the crown molding, in the spine of a dictionary, in the base of Maggie's reading lamp, every angle of the floor safe covered in crystalline 4K. The lead technician handed me a secure tablet, showed me the feeds, and vanished with his men into the dark the way they had come. Then I did the hardest part of all, nothing. I went back to being the fading old man. I shuffled. I trembled on schedule. I answered Charlotte's morning texts with grateful, foggy obedience, and I waited for greed to do what greed always does. It took 4 days. On the 4th afternoon, Grant let himself into the farmhouse while I pretended to nap on the porch. Through the tablet hidden under a horse blanket beside my rocking chair, I watched him walk straight into my study, with the confidence of a man entering his own office. I watched him kneel at the floor safe, and because the brass key was no longer in his pocket, because it was wrapped in cloth inside a sealed evidence envelope in my hiding place, I watched him do something even better than open it with a stolen key. He picked it. He produced a small kit of specialized tools and worked the analog combination dial with practiced, unhurried expertise, glancing over his shoulder exactly once. A venture capitalist does not learn safecraft at business school. The footage captured everything. His face in perfect clarity, his gloved hands, and then, the safe door swinging open, his phone methodically photographing Maggie's jewelry, the deed to the farm, and my bearer bonds, close enough to read the serial numbers. He was not stealing the assets. Not yet. He was cataloging them, appraising them, building the inventory of an estate he already considered his. That same week, Raymond's forensic accountants finished their quiet excavation of Grant's finances, and what they found explained everything. Beneath the polished surface of his venture capital firm, buried under 3 layers of shell corporations, was a $15 million debt to an illicit lending syndicate operating out of Baltimore. The kind of creditors who do not send letters, and whose compounding interest had been strangling him for 4 years. Grant was not merely greedy, he was desperate, cornered, and to satisfy men like that, he needed collateral he did not have. He needed my farm, my bonds, my entire estate, and stapled to the loan guarantee documents Raymond's people recovered was the most obscene discovery of all. My own signature, forged, reconstructed, we would later prove from the photographs Grant had taken inside my safe. He had already pledged my life's work to his creditors. My legal incompetence was the last remaining formality. The trap they were building for me was nearly complete. So was mine. They moved on a Friday morning. I heard the vehicles before I saw them. 3 sets of tires on my gravel, too many for a family visit. Through the kitchen window I watched a county social services sedan, a sheriff's cruiser, and a white medical transport van roll to a stop in front of my porch, and behind them, gleaming and unhurried, Grant's black sedan. Charlotte stepped out first, dressed in sober navy, like a woman attending a funeral she had planned herself. A social worker with a clipboard flanked her. Grant remained by his car, sunglasses on, arms crossed, a man supervising a delivery. The social worker was gentle, and that was somehow the cruelest part. She spoke slowly and clearly, the way you speak to a frightened child, and she informed me that pursuant to an emergency ex parte order signed by the court that very morning, I was being placed under a temporary protective conservatorship, with my daughter Charlotte appointed as conservator of my person and my estate. 2 licensed neurologists, she said, had signed sworn affidavits attesting that I represented an immediate danger to myself, citing, among other things, a documented incident involving a gas stove, rapid cognitive decline observed by my family, and erratic financial behavior. 2 doctors I had never met, describing an incident that never happened, diagnosing a decline that had been fed to me 1 white capsule at a time. I could have fought them on the porch. I could have recited statute and case law until their heads spun, demanded counsel, made a scene worthy of the evening news. Every instinct of an innocent man screams to resist. But resistance at that moment was exactly what the paperwork predicted. Combative, paranoid, delusional regarding persecution by family members. Any fire I showed would be poured straight into their affidavits as fuel. So the lion lay down. I let my hands shake. I asked in a small, confused voice whether Charlotte knew about this, and my daughter stepped forward, took both my hands in hers, and with tears balanced perfectly on her lower lashes said, "It's okay, Daddy. We're doing this because we love you. You're going somewhere safe." Then she leaned in, pressed her cheek against mine as if embracing me, and whispered, in a voice only I could hear, a voice with no tears in it at all, words I will carry to my grave. "You should have just signed everything over, old man. This is what stubborn gets you." They guided me into the back of the transport van. The doors closed. The farm, Maggie's garden, Maggie's porch, Maggie's cold and blameless stove slid away behind tinted glass. And there, on that hard plastic bench, with my wrists resting in my lap and the tires humming beneath me, the full, bitter irony of my situation finally unfolded, and I nearly laughed out loud at the perfect cruelty of it. 25 years ago, at the height of my career, I had been appointed to a special state commission, tasked with rewriting Virginia's adult conservatorship and guardianship statutes. There had been an epidemic in those years, financial predators hollowing out the estates of vulnerable seniors, while the courts moved at the speed of continents. I spent countless nights at my mahogany desk drafting airtight provisions, and my centerpiece, was an emergency mechanism, a narrow ex parte pathway allowing the state to intervene within hours, not months, if 2 independent physicians swore under oath that a senior faced immediate danger. I stood before the state legislature and argued for it with everything I had. Rapid intervention, I told them, is the only way to reach victims before the predators finish feeding. They called it my legal masterpiece, a shield for the defenseless, And now my own daughter had picked up my shield and sharpened its edges into a blade. She had weaponized my own statute, my own words, my own life's proudest work, to have its author declared incompetent and caged. The law I built to stop predators was carrying me to a locked ward in a white van, and the predators were driving behind it in a luxury sedan. Her maneuver was brilliant. I will give her that, the way one prosecutor tips his hat to a truly elegant fraud. But brilliance built on forgery is a house built on sand, and she had made one fatal miscalculation. She believed that by taking my phone, my house, and my freedom, she had taken my ability to fight. She did not know about the cameras threaded through my study, recording in silence even now. She did not know that Raymond Delgado sat in his downtown office with certified toxicology reports, dated envelopes of capsules, forensic accounting that tied her husband to a Baltimore syndicate, and 4K footage of Grant cracking my safe. And most importantly, she did not know about the small plastic phone taped flat against my chest beneath 2 layers of wool, its outline invisible, its battery full. I traced its rectangular shape once with my thumb as the van rocked over a pothole, and then I sat perfectly still. I did not need to call anyone yet. I needed only to survive the intake evaluation, and I knew that machinery from the inside. I knew the cognitive tests, the behavioral markers, the questions behind the questions. With the sedatives long out of my bloodstream, my mind was a scalpel again. I would pass their evaluations flawlessly, and the law, my law, contained one provision my daughter had apparently skimmed. An emergency ex parte order is temporary by design. The court must hold a full evidentiary hearing within 72 hours to make the conservatorship permanent. 72 hours, 3 days. Charlotte and Grant believed they had imprisoned me. In truth, they had done something far more useful. They had set a date, a time, and a courtroom, an official stage with a sitting judge and a sworn record, at which every piece of evidence could be detonated at once. They had built my trap for me, and RSVP'd to their own destruction. The Tucker Behavioral Health Center sat on the outskirts of the county like a fortress of good intentions. Clean brick, locked doors, and the particular silence of a place where other people decide when your lights go out. I offered zero resistance at intake. I knew that any assertion of my rights, any demand for an attorney, any flash of the man I actually was, would be documented in the chart as combative paranoia and read aloud at the hearing in 72 hours. So I shuffled across the linoleum. I stared blankly at the intake nurses and answered in confused murmurs. I let them catalog my confiscated belongings, my wallet, my watch, my ring of keys, never suspecting that the inventory was one item short, because no orderly pats down the chest of a docile old man who cannot remember what day it is. They walked me down a long, sterile corridor to a private room. A narrow bed bolted to the floor, a single chair, a bathroom with no mirror. The heavy door clicked shut behind me, and the electronic lock engaged with a solid, echoing thud. Through the reinforced glass slit in the door, I watched a burly orderly take up his post in the hallway. I was officially a prisoner of the state, held inside a system I had helped design. There is a special vertigo in that, like an architect locked in his own building, listening to his own doors refusing to open. I sat on the edge of the stiff mattress and I waited. 2 full hours, until intake rounds finished and the wing settled into its deep institutional quiet, until the orderly outside stopped pacing and started reading a magazine. Only then did I slide my hand beneath my cardigan, peel the small phone from my chest, and dim its screen to the lowest setting, shielding the glow with my body. I typed fast, the name of the facility, the ex parte order, the 2 neurologists' affidavits, the whispered sentence my daughter had pressed into my ear like a knife. Then I hit send and slid the phone beneath the mattress. Raymond's reply came back in 30 seconds, and I could feel the fury compressed inside its clipped legal shorthand. They bypassed the standard docket. Emergency provision, your emergency provision. But the order is temporary by statute. Full evidentiary hearing required within 72 hours to make it permanent. Monday morning, Henrico County Circuit Court. That gives us 3 days. 3 days, a narrow window, but a window is all a patient man needs. I typed my response, outlining the shape of our counterattack, and it was the same shape I had used against cartels and crooked banks for 30 years. Let the target feel safe until the moment the net closes. We let them think they've won, I wrote. File nothing, contest nothing. No motions, no letters, no signal to their attorney. Let them walk into that courtroom Monday morning, believing they are attending a formality. believing the old man will be wheeled in sedated and silent, or not brought in at all. Understood, Raymond wrote back. And Walter, the package is complete. Forensics has fully penetrated the shell layers. We have the paper trail tying his firm to the Baltimore syndicate, the loan guarantees with your forged signature, and chain of custody on the toxicology and the capsules. The technical team has certified the surveillance footage, time-stamped, unedited, 4K. It is irrefutable. We will bury them. 2 more instructions, I typed. First, quietly subpoena both neurologists who signed those affidavits. Doctors whose their signatures crumble the moment they smell a perjury charge. They will turn on their buyers on the stand. Second, have the federal referral package ready. The syndicate debt, the wire movements, the forgery. The second the state hearing ends, it all goes to the U.S. Attorney's office the same afternoon. Already drafted, Raymond replied. Get some sleep, counselor. Monday we go to work. I slid the phone back beneath the mattress and lay down on the bolted bed, hands folded on my chest like a man lying in state. Over the next 3 days I did precisely what the institution asked of me. I ate their food, I attended their evaluations. And with the chemicals long gone from my blood, I passed every cognitive test they administered, quietly, unremarkably, scoring not like a genius but like exactly what I was, a healthy, oriented, fully competent 70-year-old man. Every clean result was logged into my chart by staff who had no stake in my daughter's story. Every entry was one more witness for Monday. At night, in the dark, I did allow myself one human moment. I thought of Charlotte at 6 years old, asleep on my shoulder in the truck on the way home from the state fair, cotton candy still stuck in her hair. I let myself grieve that child, really grieve her, the way I had grieved Maggie. Because I understood now that the little girl was gone, and had been gone for a long time, and that the woman wearing her face was someone I was about to meet in court. Then I closed the drawer on it the way you learned to in my old line of work. Monday came with rain. They transported me to the Henrico County Circuit Court in the same white van, and I made one request of the staff that morning, humbly, as a confused old man's whim. I asked to wear my own clothes. My flannel shirt, my worn boots, my old felt hat. It was not sentiment, it was strategy. I wanted Charlotte and Grant to look across that courtroom and see exactly what they expected to see. A broken farmer, an object, a formality. Overconfident people make speeches. Overconfident people don't check the exits. And so we arrive back where I began this story. I walked into that courtroom holding my hat, rain still beaded on my shoulders. And my daughter smirked, and her husband shook his head, and I heard her small choked laugh cut through my chest. And then Judge Alan Whitfield looked up from the bench, and the color poured out of his face, and his hand trembled on the gavel, and he whispered into the silence, "My God, is it really him?" Here is what my daughter did not know, because she had never once asked about my life before her convenience required me to have no life at all. 25 years earlier, when I stood before the state legislature defending the conservatorship statutes I had drafted, there had been a young law clerk assigned to the Judiciary Committee. A serious, watchful young man who spent that entire session carrying my briefing books and absorbing every argument. That clerk's name was Alan Whitfield. I had written him a letter of recommendation for his first judicial clerkship. He had built his career, in no small part, on the foundations of elder protection law, my law. And now, a quarter-century later, Judge Whitfield sat at his own bench, presiding over an emergency conservatorship docket, looking down at a petition that named as its allegedly incompetent ward the man who wrote the statute itself. "Counsel," the judge said slowly, his eyes never leaving me, "is the respondent in this matter Walter Hensley, the Walter Hensley? Of the Hensley Commission?" Charlotte's attorney, a sleek man who had clearly been told this, was a rubber stamp, rustled his papers. "Your Honor, the respondent is a retired farmer, suffering from documented cognitive. I clerked for the committee that passed his statute," Judge Whitfield said quietly, and the temperature of the room changed. "I have seen this man argue. Proceed very carefully." Raymond Delgado rose beside me, and to this day I believe some part of Charlotte still did not understand what was happening. Right up until Raymond said the words, "Your Honor, the respondent waives nothing, contests everything, and is fully prepared to testify on his own behalf. And the defense moves to enter evidence." I took the stand myself. I spoke without notes, in complete sentences, citing the statute by section number, because I had written the sections. I watched the certainty drain out of the plaintiff's table one exhibit at a time, and I presented our case the way I had presented every case of my career, calmly, chronologically, and without mercy. The certified toxicology report came first, showing a powerful antipsychotic sedative in my blood with no prescription in existence. Then the dated envelopes, 22 white capsules, sealed daily, chain of custody intact, and the laboratory analysis matching them to the compound in my bloodstream. Then Charlotte's own cheerful morning texts, blown up on the courtroom screen. "Did you take your medicine, Dad?" The two neurologists from the affidavits had been subpoenaed, and were sitting in the gallery, gray-faced. Under the judge's stare and the shadow of perjury charges, the first one recanted before lunch, admitting he had never examined me, never met me, and had signed the affidavit as a favor arranged and compensated through an intermediary of Grant's firm. The second doctor's attorney requested a recess to discuss cooperation. Then I reached into the evidence boxes and pulled out the drive. "This contains raw, unedited, time-stamped 4K footage from concealed cameras in my private study," I said, my tone turning razor-sharp as the bailiff carried it to the bench. "It shows Grant Ward bypassing my security, using specialized tools to defeat the combination dial of my floor safe, and photographing the contents, my late wife's jewelry, the deed to my farm, and bearer bonds whose serial numbers are legible in the recording." They played it on the courtroom screen. Nobody breathed. Grant's face in the footage was pin-sharp, unhurried, gloved, the face of a man robbing a vault he believed he had already inherited. At the plaintiff's table, the living Grant gripped the wood until his knuckles went white, opening and closing his mouth around explanations that did not exist. And then the last blow, the one that turned fraud into desperation and desperation into motive. Raymond's forensic accountants took the stand and unfolded, layer by layer, the $15 million shadow debt buried beneath Grant's venture firm. 4 years of compounding obligations to an illicit lending syndicate out of Baltimore, the kind of creditors who collect in ways banks do not, and stapled into the record beside it. The loan guarantee documents pledging my farm and my bonds as collateral, bearing a signature that 3 independent document examiners testified, was forged, reconstructed from the photographs Grant had taken inside my safe. The emergency petition filed against me was not an act of concern, I said, turning to face the bench for my final words. It was a liquidation event. They needed me declared incompetent before the fraudulent transfers scheduled for this afternoon could be contested. Your Honor, they were not protecting a vulnerable senior. They were closing a sale. Judge Whitfield stared at the mountain of evidence before him, and I watched his expression harden from shock into pure, righteous judicial fury. Charlotte was screaming now, a continuous, hysterical stream of denials and apologies that drowned out the rain lashing the tall windows. She clawed at her husband's sleeve, begging him to fix it. Grant did not look at his wife. He looked at the doors. And then the animal in him made its final, honest decision. He shoved Charlotte aside so violently her chair went over, spilling her onto the polished floor, and he vaulted the plaintiff's table and sprinted down the center aisle for the exit. A man running simultaneously from federal prison and from the Baltimore men waiting outside the walls of it. He made it halfway. "Bailiffs, secure that man." Judge Whitfield's gavel came down like a thunderclap. 3 officers converged with practiced precision. The largest took Grant off his feet with a shoulder tackle that drove him into the oak spectator benches, and the ratcheting snap of handcuffs echoed through the chamber like the closing of a ledger. The judge did not pause for breath. He declared the emergency conservatorship revoked, null and void from the moment of its fraudulent inception, and stated for the record that the court found me in full possession of my faculties, my autonomy, and my rights. Then he ordered the doors secured and issued bench warrants from the bench itself, for Grant Ward and for Charlotte Hensley Ward. The charges rolled through the room like a requiem: elder abuse, premeditated fraud, forgery of financial instruments, and, most damning of all, the poisoning and attempted chemical imprisonment of a vulnerable senior citizen. Every asset connected to Grant and his shell entities was frozen by order of the court before the rain outside had eased. The trap had not merely closed, it had crushed them. A female deputy approached Charlotte and instructed her to place her hands behind her back. My daughter resisted, weeping hysterically, shaking her head from side to side as the steel closed around her wrists. She turned toward me, mascara running in dark rivers down her pale cheeks, and opened her mouth to scream something, But the deputies were already moving her toward the side exit and the holding cells beyond. Raymond Delgado stood beside me, arms crossed, watching the systematic dismantling of the people who had tried to steal my life. We exchanged a single silent nod. The job was not just done, it was done completely. I walked out of the courtroom with my back straight and my mind clearer than it had been in years. The corridor outside was cold marble and fluorescent hum, and I could see the deputies escorting Charlotte toward the transport elevator at the far end. When she saw me step into the hallway, something frantic surged through her. She fought the officer's grip, threw her weight forward, and dropped to her knees on the marble directly in my path. When they tried to lift her, she went limp and wrapped her handcuffed arms around my scuffed work boots, sobbing, a loud guttural sound of pure panic and total defeat. "Dad, please," she screamed, her voice tearing down the empty corridor. "You have to stop this. You can't let them take me. I'm your daughter. I'm your blood. Please, I am begging you." I looked down at the woman weeping at my feet. I saw the face I had kissed goodnight 10,000 times, the eyes that had smiled at me across the dinner table for 40 years. And in the same face, in the same eyes, I saw the person who had dissolved sedatives into my trust one capsule at a time, who had whispered you should have just signed everything over into my ear while a transport van waited, who had laughed, when a broken old farmer walked into her courtroom. I felt no cruelty in that moment. I want to be honest about that. What I felt was something quieter and far more final, the complete absence of illusion. I did not bend down. I did not raise my voice. I spoke with the quiet calm that had ended 100 cross-examinations. "You bled that out of yourself the day you put poison in my cup." Then I stepped backward, drawing my boots gently out of her grasp, turned, and walked away down the corridor. The rhythm of my footsteps echoed off the marble. I did not look back, not once, as her screams faded behind the steel doors of the elevator. The justice system, so often glacial, moves with remarkable speed when it is powered by high-definition evidence and the personal fury of a sitting judge. Within 6 months, everything was finished. Grant Ward was convicted on multiple federal counts: wire fraud, grand larceny, forgery, conspiracy. The referral package Raymond delivered to the U.S. Attorney's Office that same Monday afternoon did more than bury Grant. The forensic accounting trails led federal investigators straight into the Baltimore lending syndicate, and by spring, that entire operation had been dismantled in a series of coordinated arrests. Grant was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. He lost his firm, his license, his reputation, and his tailored suits all in the same season. Charlotte faced her own reckoning in state court. The elder abuse and fraud convictions stripped away everything she had betrayed her father to keep: the social standing, the accumulated wealth, the carefully curated life. She received a lengthy sentence in a state correctional facility, sealed off completely from the luxury she had been willing to poison me to protect. Their greed had been their undoing, a toxin far more potent than anything they ever slipped into my coffee. And I went home. I worked closely with Raymond over the following year to build something out of the wreckage. We established a large, ironclad legal trust and moved the deed to the farm and the majority of my estate inside its walls, not merely to protect it, but to weaponize it for good. The trust exists for one purpose: to fund legal defense, forensic investigation, and protective services for senior citizens trapped in abusive conservatorships. The statute I wrote a quarter-century ago has been amended now, too. Raymond and I testified side by side before the same legislature, closing the loopholes my own daughter taught me existed. I made certain as law allows, that my masterpiece can never again be turned against the people it was built to shield. It was a crisp morning in early November when I finally felt it. The sun was just clearing the hills, laying long golden light across the frost-covered pasture. I walked out onto the back porch with a steaming mug of black coffee, and the farm was perfectly quiet except for the morning birds and the soft complaints of the chickens. I stood there alone in the cold, bright air, and for the first time since a red-stamped envelope appeared in my mailbox, I was completely at peace. "Now, before I let you go, sit with me on this porch a little longer, because if all you take from my story is the satisfaction of watching two predators marched out of a courtroom in handcuffs, then I have failed you, and I did not survive all of this to fail you. The first thing I want you to understand is this: betrayal almost never announces itself. It does not arrive wearing a stranger's face. It arrives wearing the most familiar face in your world, carrying a casserole, offering to handle the paperwork, telling you to rest. The predators who do the most damage are not the ones who break down your door. They are the ones you hand the keys to, because love told you to, and because we are taught, wrongly, that suspicion within a family is itself a kind of sin. It is not. Verification is not an accusation. Asking to see the bank confirmation is not a betrayal of your child. Hiding it from you is a betrayal of their father. If someone truly has nothing to hide, transparency costs them nothing. Remember that. The people who love you will never punish you for asking questions. Only the people exploiting you will. The second thing is about the elderly, and it is addressed to everyone who is not yet old, because you will be sooner than you can imagine. We live in a culture that quietly teaches us that aging is a decline in worth, that an old man in worn boots is a problem to be managed, an account to be administered, an inconvenience to be settled. My daughter did not wake up one morning a monster. She marinated for years in the casual assumption that my life was already over, and my assets were simply waiting for their real owners. When you treat the old as already gone, you make it thinkable to hurry them along. So I ask you, look at the elders in your life. Truly look. Ask them who they were before you knew them. The quiet grandfather at the end of the table carried whole worlds before you were born, and some of those worlds might astonish you. Respect for the elderly is not charity, it is accuracy. The third lesson is the hardest one, and it took me a locked psychiatric room to learn it. Forgiveness and accountability are not enemies, and one is not a substitute for the other. People will tell you that family forgives everything, that blood outweighs any crime. I do not believe that anymore, and I will tell you what I believe instead. Forgiveness is internal work. It is what I do on this porch at sunrise so that hatred does not get to own my remaining years. In time, I have even managed a strange, aching kind of grief for Charlotte. Not the woman in the courtroom, but the 6-year-old asleep on my shoulder with cotton candy in her hair. I mourn that child the way I mourn my wife, as someone beloved who is gone. That is forgiveness, and it is mine, and no one can take it from me. But accountability is external work, and it is not optional. Letting Charlotte and Grant walk free would not have been mercy. It would have been sponsorship, a subsidy paid to every future predator at the expense of every future victim. Boundaries are not the opposite of love. Boundaries are what love looks like when it finally respects itself. You can weep for someone and still testify against them. You can pray for someone and still press charges. The stone in my chest that day in the marble corridor was not the death of my heart. It was my heart, finally standing guard over the right person, me, and the last thing, the thing I would engrave over every courthouse door if they let me. Never mistake a person's quiet patience for weakness. Gentleness is not the absence of strength. It is strength that has chosen its moment. An old lion may rest in the shade for years, but his teeth remain exactly where he left them. If life has made you underestimated, because of your age, your accent, your worn boots, your silence, then understand that being underestimated is not only an insult. In the right hands, it is armor, it is camouflage. It is sometimes the last weapon they never see coming. The truth moves slowly, but it burns away every shadow in the end. Stand in it, wait for it, and when your moment comes, walk into the room holding your old hat in both hands, and let them laugh. If my story kept you here until the end, if some part of it made you call your father, or check on your grandmother, or finally ask to see the paperwork, then do an old man one kindness. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next story I share on my channel. Leave a like to let me know you were here, and tell me in the comments. What would you have done in my place? That night you realized the stove had been cold for 2 years. I read every comment on this porch with this same cup of coffee, and your words genuinely keep me company. Turn on notifications so we don't lose each other. There are more stories where this one came from, and I'm not done telling them. The story you just heard was written by human hands, mine at this kitchen table, with a pot of coffee going cold beside the keyboard and a dog asleep on my feet. Names, places, and certain details have been changed to protect privacy, and some events have been shaped for the telling, as all true stories are when they pass through a storyteller. But the heart of it, the betrayal, the fight, the long road back to this quiet porch, that is as real as the frost on the pasture this morning. I share these stories not to reopen wounds, but because somewhere out there, someone is staring at an envelope with a red stamp, or a bottle with no label, and beginning to doubt their own mind. Friend, this one was for you. You are not confused. You are not alone. And you are far, far stronger than they think you are. Thank you for spending this time with me. And I'll see you in the next story.